My name is Justine Palkowski, and my business is called Second Shore. I really focus on coastal art. I've been painting and drawing my entire life, like a lot of other similar stories of your guests on your podcast. Right now, I'm part-time, and I'm really excited to talk about that because I don't know that I ever want to go full-time. I'm a marketer, so I still have a very creative career. So creativity is a core value of mine, and whether it's painting on a canvas or doing something digitally, I just absolutely love being creative. So right now I just moved to Buffalo, New York from Charleston a couple years ago to raise my daughter. So right now we live in this cute little village called East Aurora, which is right outside of the city of Buffalo.
Love that. Well, let's just jump right in. I want to know you're part-time and you don't ever want to go full-time. I actually have heard this for more people than you would expect. Can we talk about it? What is your thought process and why do you feel that way?
Yeah, so I don't know. I feel like that's a loaded question. So
Yeah.
let me start at the beginning. So first, like I said, I've been an artist my whole life and did AP art in high school, studied studio art in college, the whole thing. And that was kind of that. And then I started selling my art, I don't know, maybe 2018, 2019. It was in Charleston and it all started, I painted something for my own house, shared it, and then somebody wanted one. So then I started doing commissions and then COVID really blew up because everyone was redoing their houses. And I remember this huge painting I did for a house in downtown Somerville. It was just absolutely beautiful. So it kind of turned into a business on accident. And I still never really like identified as an artist. I was just like, I'm a marketer and I like art. And that's kind of really like where I stood for a very long time. And then I was hanging out with a friend who was a newer friend, and we were at this networking event, and she introduced me to one of her coworkers. And she was like, "Oh, this is my friend Justine. She's an artist." And I was like, "Am I?" I'm like, that was really the first time somebody looked at me as a creative and an artist instead of a professional marketer. So after that, I was like, you know what? I am an artist. And even if it is part-time, it's I have to put away that imposter syndrome because I still am an artist. And I love doing it part-time because, first of all, I love my full-time job. And I know many people don't. I'm very lucky to be in a career that I do enjoy. I also feel like I'm multi-passionate. So sometimes I get bored with things very easily. And I need to be able to switch back and forth between different projects, whether it's personally or professionally. And being a part-time artist lets me do things with passion instead of the financial strain or that pressure to make money. Sometimes I do still feel that pressure, especially if I'm having a slower season. And then it's always like when my website renews, because it's like, 400 some dollars for the
Mhm.
annual. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is
Yeah,
such
all
a
my
big
renewals hit in September,
expense.
so I feel that and I'm like, what is going on?
Yes, exactly. And that's when I'm like, okay, we got to start pumping some more stuff out because I do treat this as a business. And even if it's part-time, but right now I'm really enjoying it. And I think being part-time allows me to do that. I don't ever want to lose my job, but if I did, maybe I would give it a shot. But for now, I don't have the intention to do this until I can do it full-time. I'm going to intend to do it the
Yeah.
same way it's running.
No, I love that. And I mean, I think I'm very similar to you in that obviously I do this and I have the club and the gallery and my own artwork. And I think those things are intertwined for sure. But I really didn't ever consider being a full-time artist because I love all these other things. And like, I feel like I can be a very successful, passionate artist without being full-time with it. So I think it's a really important conversation because there is some imposter syndrome around calling yourself an artist when you're not full-time. I've heard that from different people. And it's just funny because it's like, okay, well, what are the parameters that make you qualified to be an artist? And so it's so funny that you say that because I'm looking behind you at this beautiful painting. I'm like, I can never imagine this woman not describing herself that way. So I just think it's a really important conversation to bring up.
Thank you. I think so too. And, going back to kind of the imposter syndrome of it. That's something we do to ourselves. Nobody's telling us, you can't be an artist if you're not full time. I don't know where we make up that story or where that comes from, but it's something that I've kind of had to relearn over the years. So, yeah, I think that's just a really interesting point.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your artwork? So where did your initial, I mean, I know you said you were creating some pieces in Charleston, but like where did the inspiration come from and what are you creating mainly now?
Yeah, that's also a journey in itself. So, like I said, I've been creating my whole life, and it took a really long time for me to kind of find my niche. And again, I'm a multi-passionate person. I'm also an Aries, so I'm very impulsive and I just do things like on the fly and get an idea and I'm like, I need to do this right now. So I felt like I had a hard time kind of niching down. This was pre-COVID. Does anybody else like my timeline of my life is like pre-COVID and post-COVID?
No, I'm the same way. It's so weird that we think that way, but it kind of makes sense. That's where everyone's lives really pivoted in businesses, especially.
Yes, exactly. I think that's what it was because that's really where my business pivoted to being more coastal art. But pre-COVID, I did this series. I was really playing with watercolor and I've always been familiar with acrylic and not so much watercolor. And I did these, I wish I had one around me, but they were kind of flowers, but I was like blowing on the paper. I would take a hair dryer and they were kind of splattered. And
Hmm.
then I did a big turtle that ended up selling and people loved them, but I didn't like making them. And I feel like that's always like the tale as old as time. Like your most popular item, you're like, oh, I don't want to create this anymore.
Yeah,
But for some reason, it's resonating with other people. So I did that for a long time. And I struggled with what to call my business name because, well, two reasons. First, I got married, so my last name changed. And second, my last name now, Palkowski, it's phonetic, but people see it and it's long and it's confusing. And then people always think my name's Justin and not Justine. So I'm like, you know what?
keep it
My
easy.
name just isn't feeling like it's the right name. So I struggled and I went back and forth with what to call my business and different Instagram handles. And then I was like, well, what am I creating? And I tried some portraits and I was doing some bright colors. And again, people loved it, but I was like, I'm not going to hang this in my house. And it wasn't feeling authentic. So then during COVID, I created kind of like an abstract seascape. And that's really what kicked off the coastal art. And then I had people commissioning them. And then I did this one, it was kind of like a big barrel wave. And that one, I think I did multiple for people all over Charleston of this big barrel wave. And that's where I was like, okay, I love these seascapes and I've always loved the beach. I mean, when I was a kid, I would like ask for Hawaii calendars for my bedroom. I've never been to Hawaii, until I was an adult. I just always loved the beach. And if that was the first time that I started creating something where I was like, this feels authentic. This feels and it wasn't just living in Charleston. In Buffalo, I'm sandwiched between two of the Great Lakes and the Finger Lakes. So I'm always on the water. My family has a lake house. We're out on boats as often as we can get there. Sometimes we'll just go and have like a picnic on the beach for dinner. We might do that tonight because it's still really warm and sunny before the sun starts setting too early.
Right.
And then I started painting water and I was not good at it. And I was like on a mission, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. I was on a mission. I'm like, I'm going to paint water every day until I get better at it. And it's taken such a long time. That's really
Right.
where things have evolved into this water. My grandma has a cottage right on the lake. There's a dock that goes out into the water. And my absolute favorite thing to do is just to sit out on the edge of the dock at golden hour when the boats are gone in for the night and the water's a little more calm and the sun just sparkles on the top.
Mhm.
It's like glittering. It's
Beautiful.
just my favorite thing. And that's kind of really what inspires me. So my work now is pretty much completely coastal. I like do Christmas ornaments, anything that I can put a seascape on. That's really what I've been focusing on.
I love that. And I love specifically about your story that you were painting things that were selling and people loved them, but it didn't feel aligned with you. I think a lot of artists probably can resonate with that. I feel like I personally have gone through phases where I say to myself, I know this will sell, or I assume this will be a hit or trendy, but it doesn't feel aligned with what I'd actually put in my home or what's representative of me and what I want to put out there. And I think what's great about your story is that like we all kind of go through it and it takes time to actually figure out what you love to create and what resonates with your buyer. And that's okay. Like it's okay. It's actually normal. Like you're gonna have, it's a game of patience. Like it's gonna take you some time to get there. But I think that's so nice to hear. And I think it's also really nice that, again, this is why I'm a proponent of not always going full time right away. You could experiment. You're like, I'm gonna learn to paint water and I'm gonna paint water every single day. Had you been dependent on selling all your artwork right away, you'd probably be like, well, I'm really bad at this. Maybe I shouldn't do it every day. And so I want to share that and like kind of highlight it for artists that maybe or are kind of where you were and just hear that, like, look where you got. It took a little bit of time and it didn't happen overnight, but it happened through, trial and error and continuing to push yourself.
Yeah, that's another thing is, as an artist, sometimes it comes naturally. I mean, truly, like as a kid,
Mhm.
the passion came naturally to me, but the talent usually doesn't come naturally to maybe some people that there's some artists out there that are just so wildly, I'm like, that's not just practice. Like you have a special gift.
Right.
But for the most part, whether you're painting portraits or water or florals, it really comes down to practice. And there's been times where I can paint a portrait pretty well. Hands are hard, but I can do a portrait pretty well. And then florals, I struggle with. And it's just not something that I'm used to painting. And I think, especially as a new artist, you get on TikTok and you find somebody and you're like, I want to do that. And then you try it and you're like, well, I'm not good at this. And then you almost try to replicate something else that somebody's doing until you're good at it. But it's like they're not sharing the whole journey. They're just sharing probably the good parts because that's the good part. Why would they share the really crappy work and all the time and the practice it took to get there?
Well, and I think even now, I mean, I still make crappy work. Like even
Yeah.
my paintings that I'm quote unquote good at, they have a really crappy phase typically. And I'm like, I forgot how to paint. But I think
Yeah.
that's normal. And I love what you said about practice. I read somewhere or someone described it this way where it's like you almost treat your art or like creative career creativity in general as an athlete would treat like showing up to practice. They're not just going to show up at the game and like be good. It's like even if you have an innate talent and like you're a creative, you're an artist, you have that innate talent, you still have to practice to keep up the skill, to stay sharp, to stay creative. And I think that's what, I don't know. It sounds so obvious, but I think people forget sometimes that it's like, no, sometimes we just have to like regularly show up to kind of maintain and improve and remember what we like.
Oh, for sure. It's only September here, but you got to start Christmas stuff early. I painted probably 30 of these ornaments last year and then haven't painted them in 8 months, 9 months. The other night, I was like, let me see if I can get like 10, at least like the base layer done. The first one I did, I was like, oh my gosh, this
Well,
is
ornaments are
terrible. And then I was like, the gradients on the old ones were like perfect. I'm like, how did I do this? It took me like three or four again. And I was like, okay, now I remember what I was doing and I remember how to do this. But even something that I did that I was really proud of and that I thought was pretty good a year ago. I sat back down 9 months later and I was just like, oh boy, we have to practice again.
Yeah, something I want to shift gears a little bit. I mean, it kind of relates to practice, but like, how do you set up your days as someone who has a lot going on outside of the art world and then obviously like having an art career? How are you, balancing your time with your other business, with life, with you said you have a daughter? Like, how are you setting up your schedule for the most part?
Yeah, that's a hard question some days, and some days it's easy. And you never know what the day is going to bring. So for me, I'm a planner and I like to have plans, but of course, having a small my daughter's in kindergarten, so it could be something different every day. For the most part, I like to plan out what I'm going to do. So going back to, I keep mentioning these ornaments just because there's one sitting here. I started painting ornaments because my daughter wouldn't sleep. And we moved here and she was a baby and she would not sleep. And I mean like anybody that has kids and like people tell you to like let your baby cry it out. Mine didn't ever, like there was no cry it out. She's the most strong-willed little girl I've ever met in my life. We would pull all-nighters trying to like put her back in her room. We tried everything and she just wouldn't sleep. So what I started doing is I would put her in a room and I was like, okay, I'm going to be across the hall where you can see me. I'm not going to lay here next to you, but I've got to move away a little bit. So
Yeah.
I came across the hall and I started painting ornaments because I think at that time, it was probably close to Christmas and I was just experimenting and playing and it worked really well. This is actually a really good time to paint. So now when I want to paint, which is also terrible because the lighting is awful, super late at night. Sometimes I paint something and the next morning I'm like, oh, it's not the color I thought it was. If I'm going to paint something, I usually do it when I put my daughter down to bed. And I'm like, that'll give me a good hour or two because she's across the hall. And sometimes she comes in here and she bothers me and she wakes up, but I'm still here. But that's the time where I'm like, okay, we're going to work on this chunk of painting. So it's kind of my evening time. My husband's watching TV or something. I don't watch a ton of TV. Maybe I'll put it on my computer or something, but that's kind of when I paint. And then any other time that I have something going on or I know there's an application due for a show or I don't know, an exhibition coming up that I want to apply to. I try to block off the days. So I'm like, okay, I know I'm not going to be able to paint and get all of these applications in and write this email newsletter. So I'm like, okay, Monday, we're going to paint 10 ornaments. Tuesday, I'm going to make sure this application is in. Wednesday, I will draft an email newsletter and get it scheduled. So I really have to plan out my time. And sometimes things change and I'm like, okay, I can't do that. But as long as I'm meeting the deadlines that I want to meet and still applying to the things that I want to apply to, I consider that a pretty big win.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll, I don't know if you've ever done this. I'll be like, okay, there's something that I'm going to apply to. Maybe it's an art show and I'm going to apply to this, but then you kind of procrastinate and you get to the deadline and I'm like, actually, I don't think I want to do it. I think sometimes I want to apply to everything because if you're not applying to things, you don't get opportunities. I try to plan things out. And by doing that, not only do I get things done, but sometimes it helps me to take a step back and just prioritize and think about what I actually want to do and what's actually going to help my business and not just jump at every opportunity because it's there.
Yeah, well, I actually think limited time it can actually be beneficial because it does make you really learn to prioritize. I know I always tell artists when they do jump to full time, okay, you're going to have all this time and you think it's going to be wonderful. And in many ways it is, absolutely. But you're going to lose that sense of like pressure to do the things you have to do. And then it's really easy to let those things slide. And so, all of a
Mhm.
sudden, you're focusing on all the kind of shiny objects, not necessarily the have to do. So I love that you set it up that way. And I think it's probably really smart why you've become so successful is again, you're like, well, this is what I need to do. And then even with like the deadlines and things like that, you're like, okay, that wasn't aligned. Like there's a reason I put it off. Sometimes I have those realizations too. And I'm like, there's a reason I never really clicked the submit button on that one.
Exactly. For me personally, I know everybody's different. I need to compartmentalize things. So even if I'm, sometimes I take a week off and I work from home. So, sometimes I have all this time, especially in the winter, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this time? I still need to, I can't jump back and forth between tasks and say, well, I'm going to do this painting and then this email and then
Yeah.
apply to this show and then spend time with my daughter. I really, for me personally, it helps to say, this is a marketing day. So I'm going to schedule email newsletters. Maybe a lot of times I'll record Instagram reels or TikToks, but I just like save them in my draft. This day we're going to edit them and schedule them out. And then this day is for painting. Maybe this day is for updating my website or whatever it is. Mondays, my daughter has dance. So Monday is her day and that's family time day. And maybe I don't do everything. So I do a lot. I'm a good multitasker as well. So I can take on all these things, but I have to put them into buckets and say, you're a marketing thing, you're an art thing, you're a family thing.
Well, I think that's a really good way to think about it too, because I think as much as we all want to say we're great at switching, I guess I should say, we're often not. And so I definitely fall into the same bucket where even within a day, it's like my first half of the day kind of has to be focused on something, or my second half of the day kind of has to be like, I'm not good at saying, we're going to do this and then this and then this and like ping pong back and forth between different tasks because I never get like deep enough in the project to make any real progress, I guess. So I
Yes.
definitely relate with that.
I love that point. So then you're getting a lot of things done, but you're kind of like half-assing everything and you're not getting everything done. Like one thing's not getting done very well. So do you do that with your different streams of your business? Like today's an art gallery day, today's a painting day.
Kind of. Yeah. So I would say I check email pretty much in the morning and then at the end of the day because we're in the art world. Rarely is there an emergency in the middle of the day. Occasionally it's like I'll also check it at lunch, but that kind of crosses the board. But at least it's like, all right, we've caught up on like what's going on in the world and I've like responded to people that need responses. And then, obviously outside of those periods, I do kind of focus and I don't have it's not like Mondays are for this, Tuesdays are for this. It's more like this week I have the October Emerging Artist Show launching. That's what we're focusing on. And other things aren't getting as much attention. It's kind of like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're going to focus on that. And then the back half of the week is going to be like, and we're scraping up everything else that didn't get done. So it's not an exact system, but it's similar in the sense that I'm focusing on things for at least like half a day at a time. It's never like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. That just doesn't work for my brain. I don't think it works
Yeah.
for most of us.
And especially for artists that are part-time and want to continue to do this part-time, you're balancing a full-time job or maybe you're full-time parenting or caregiving to somebody else and you have all these other things and it's too difficult to try to do everything at once. And I don't know, I love scheduling things out. I miss my
Definitely.
old school like paper planners. I should bring those back.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh. I mean, yeah, I'm like the queen of 85 calendars and all of that. But I think one thing I want to ask you, especially since you do also professionally do marketing, how has what you've learned there kind of come into how you market your own work? And like you said, I know you have like one day where you're like, I kind of film everything. Like, how are you working to grow your business, but also how are you thinking about marketing as a whole? You can answer those separately.
I love that question because going back to the conversation we were having about finding your niche in the art world, I feel like that's a whole topic we can dive deeper on too.
Yeah.
But with finding that, you also have to find your audience. So, an example for me would be I used to do a ton of little markets and artisan markets and in Charleston I think I started doing them a few pop-ups here and there. And then when I came to Buffalo, I started doing like the huge Christmas markets. And,
Mhm.
sometimes they would be summer markets outside. And I would do all these markets all the time. I would always make money. I never went to one and I didn't make money. So things would sell, prints would sell, some smaller paintings would sell. I was having a really hard time figuring out how to market my paintings. And when you're in a place like Buffalo, we have the best summers. We have a huge art community. If anybody ever goes to Niagara Falls or Toronto or anything, we have an art museum called the Buffalo AKG that is just an astounding art museum that we're very lucky to have here. So people here like art and people here buy art. However, are they buying coastal art when it's 7 degrees out in February? Probably not. And around the holidays too, like people are thinking about football season and holiday gifts. And a lot of my ornaments and stuff would sell, but I was struggling a bit. And then I got this opportunity with the Junior League of Buffalo. They were doing this event called the Decorator's Show House, where essentially they take a mansion that's, on the market or not being used. And then they pull in all of these interior decorators to decorate different rooms. I don't even know by chance, I think maybe on Facebook or something. Somehow I got into a conversation and I got pulled into this opportunity. And I think I took 8 paintings and 5 of them sold. And
Wow.
I priced them higher than what I would normally price for, which was probably obviously still too low. But I learned that I was like, okay, in all of this, I just found my audience. And these are people who are paying $40 just to enter, this house to go
Yeah.
see this. These are probably people who are looking for things for their own house. And these are the people that are going to buy my art. So it was such an important opportunity for me because now I might still do some of these markets. I'm not doing any this holiday season, but they're fun. But now I'm never relying on that to sell my work. And even some art galleries that I'm in and art galleries that I'm in locally, I know my audience might not be in them. So I'm trying to
Mhm.
be much more strategic about marketing in places where I know people are going to buy my paintings. And sometimes it's hard to find and you
Yeah.
have to, it's trial and error. And then marketing my business as a whole, I love branding. And I'm sure people on your podcast have talked about this before, but I just love marketing. I love branding. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And I also used to have a business doing that during COVID, which is probably why I'm not ready to full time go into art. Because again, I'm
Yeah.
multi-passionate here. So when I think about my business and I could still do better, I'm a full-time marketer and then I'm like the worst at marketing myself. But I always try to think of what's my brand going to be from what I'm wearing? So this is like a blue color that you would see in my paintings when I'm at a show, if I'm doing an interview, if I'm doing an Instagram reel, what's the audio? I don't always use trending sounds because they
Mhm.
don't fit my brand. My brand is very beachy and a little surfy and a little bit more fun. So I'll try to pick a Beach Boys song instead of whatever's trending. And is it probably hurting my views? Maybe, but I don't know. To me, it's more important that things are
Yeah.
just on brand. So when people land on my Instagram or my TikTok or my email, everything is cohesive. I try to work in like, I don't want to say too nautical, but like coastal verbiage in my website. So my about page, it says charting the course, and that's my about page. So I try to do those little things without getting too over, I'm not going crazy and I'm not being cheesy about it, but I'm being consistent in my wording, my music, my outfit choices. And I really just try to align everything. No matter what your niche is, I think that is the most important thing. For example, my frames, I build my own frames and they're these natural wood frames. I know I always love the frames that you have and the frames that you use for your examples. And I love them, but they wouldn't work for my art. And
Mhm.
because I love yours, I'm not going to put them on mine because it's just
Yeah.
not the right fit. So it's, as an artist, it's sometimes hard. And especially in this crazy social media world, because you see something that somebody else is doing and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to do that and it's not authentic. So you have to kind of reel it back. And I'm like, okay, I can look at Hayley's art, I can look at her frames and I admire this, but how do I take that concept and make it fit for my business?
Well, and I love like exactly what you said of it's coming down to everything that is you, like what you're wearing and the music you're choosing. And I think for some people listening, they're like, wow, that might sound overwhelming. That's a lot to think about. But I actually think it makes everything easier once you get in the habit. I'm the same way. I'm like you, like I kind of just like film a bunch of stuff in one day because who has time for that otherwise? Like talking about coming back to task switching. But honestly, the difference between choosing an outfit that like either is white and is white or like goes with my, paintings in some way versus just throwing something on can be the difference between like me having to like really edit a reel or me just throwing
Mhm.
it up, not having to have a cover photo because the colors kind of go and like I pick music that I think is going to kind of be the vibe of that collection and like is it what, the algorithm people of the world tell us to do? Maybe not, but I think it's working. And it's like it's attracting the people that actually want to buy the artwork. So if I don't get a million views, who cares? If I get 100 and they want to buy it, that's awesome.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is such a good point. And I mean, even with email, I love email. Again, I'm a marketer, so I love email. And my email list is smaller than I would like it to be, but my open rates are really great. So I'm like, okay, these are the people that are on my email list. So it doesn't make sense for me to try to go and grab a bunch of other people that are not going to buy my art. It can be overwhelming at first to think about what your brand is. But also, I think people just in general, like if somebody out there is listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to find a niche and I don't know what to do and this is overwhelming and now I need songs and smells and whatever. Just kind of look around your own home. The things that I pull into my business are things that I would buy this normally. I'm not buying this shirt to
Right.
wear it for an event for my business. Maybe sometimes if you have a photo shoot, but this is just me. This is what I'm wearing anyways. This is the kind of things that I like. And for a long time, I felt almost embarrassed. This is like a hard story to share, but maybe somebody can relate. I felt embarrassed to share how much I loved the beach. I don't know. I feel like people are going to be like, this is really cheesy. Like, okay, we get it. You like the beach, but it's become my brand and it's working.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I don't care. I do love the beach. I moved there for a reason. Like, and I have family in Charleston. So, but it's something that's really important to me. And even being in New York, spending time on the lakes is important to me. And that's truly what I'm doing. I'm not doing that to put on a show and to make an Instagram reel. I'm doing that
Right.
because that's what I'm doing with my family on a weekend, anyways. And I just pull that stuff into my brand. So just, even with your Reading Girls series, like if you love books, that's part of you. That's, it's not something that you're making up and you're doing it inauthentically. So I think while yes, it can feel overwhelming at first to think of all of these pieces for marketing, it's also easier if you just like don't care what other people think. What do you like? Do you like the color silver? Do you like gold? Do you like vintage? Do you like neon colors? Just pull that in and really try to embrace it and pull it in different ways because that's what's going to work. And then when it's all cohesive and somebody sees your reel or they see your email or they see your website, they see your logo, they're going to recognize it if it's consistent all the time.
Definitely. And I think it's exactly what you said. Once your work aligns with what you want to create and what you want in your home, all of this stuff happens really naturally. I also relate with like sometimes worrying about putting so much out there and being like, is this cheesy? Like, dang, this girl really likes to read. But it's also like you kind of have to lean into the stereotype. That's
Mhm.
branding. Like, but it's also me. Like I was giving book recommendations anyway. Now I just, talk about them slightly more because that's the brand. And that's
Yeah.
what I'm showing right now. And I think same with you. You're like, I like the beach. I'm not like driving to the beach to take photos for my Instagram. You're like, I'm going anyway with my family. So it feels very authentic. And I think, as you said, it gets easier the more you do it. There is that part in the beginning where you're like, am I like leading too hard into this? Is this cheesy? Is this whatever? And then you start doing it and you're like, oh, I'm actually seeing this resonate. I'm seeing people attach me with this. And you know what I also love? I think people think they have to have something that's like some really grand story. And I always say, my story is I like to read. Your
Hmm.
story is, I mean, and there's more to it than that, but the
Yeah.
same thing. It's like you like the beach. You can start with something small and more comes from that, obviously. But I tell people like in the beginning, don't overthink it. Like it can be you love the color purple. Like it doesn't have to be some great, it can be, but it doesn't have to be. So I think that should be something that kind of makes people realize this doesn't have to be as overwhelming as you think as well.
Yeah. And I think another thing is it can feel scary once you get all of this down and especially as a part-time artist because we don't have a lot of time on our hands but
Right.
you get all of this down and then like what happens when you get bored and you're like oh my gosh I do not want to paint another seascape and then you're gonna pivot and I think that's something I've also felt and it's like okay well I'm sick of this subject and I mean all artists the famous artists they all have these periods because you do something for a while and then you're like okay I'm kind of over it and it's like well how do you pivot but still pivot authentically and make sure that you're still kind of on brand. So I have like this is kind of a small example and again it's only September but I'm prepping for the holidays over here.
I
So
love.
this is like a little oyster wreath and
Hmm.
I normally do not paint in watercolor but I travel with watercolors because I can paint with them at the airport, which is where I painted this when I was delayed for a flight last year around Thanksgiving. So this is something I'm like, okay, well, if I'm sick of these canvas seascapes, I'll try to find something like this little oyster watercolor where I'm experimenting and I'm playing and I'm trying something new, but it still feels like it's on brand with me. And I
Absolutely.
try to stay open to things and try new things and not just say, well, I'm an acrylic artist, so I have to only paint in acrylic. I'm going to experiment with watercolor. And I've been experimenting with like the alcohol ink markers.
Mhm.
I don't know that that's going to be something I ever share publicly, but I've got a sketchbook and I've been playing with them.
Yeah.
And I try to find different ways to keep being creative. But I'm not like, okay, let's crumble this up, throw it away. Let's start from scratch.
Right. And I think too, I always remind people like we are creatives. You can find a way to market this new thing that you're doing. I also think if you find a way to make yourself or your personality or elements of yourself the heart of the brand, which I think you're doing naturally, I hope that I'm doing naturally, then when you pivot, it's easier to say, and now this is what I'm doing, and you're talking about it from your perspective. It doesn't have to be like, okay, now we're remarketing. Like I only talked about this and I only talked about this. It's kind of like, well, you're the heart of your brand, so it's easier to make that shift. And so I remind people of that too. It's like don't be afraid to show up and explain why you're changing and all of that. People want to see you evolve. You just have to kind of know how to do it from a marketing standpoint.
And people want your story. They want to
Yeah.
learn about you and they want to resonate with the part of you that it's like a reflection. And they're like, oh, I see this part of me. So, one thing that I did is I did a painting as a commission that was a classic car. It was a 1957 Chevy. And my dad always had classic cars. And it's something that is just so deeply ingrained in my childhood. So when I got this request for a commission, I was so excited. And the request came maybe less than a year after my dad passed away. So the person that did it was like, I don't know if you're open to this. And I was totally open to it because I was like, okay, this is something that's going to make me think of my dad. And I've always wanted to paint his cars, but I'm not really ready for it. So
Mhm.
when I did this, I shared it, but I shared it with my story. And I said, I'm not just painting this like out of the blue. Here's the story behind it.
Yeah.
I grew up going to these car shows with my dad. I always grew up around classic cars. I love classic cars. This is why I'm painting something different that's outside of my normal subject matter. And then I share the story with it. And I can't even tell you like how much the engagement on those posts got because people were so excited to hear the story behind it. And I think,
Yeah.
again, it's something that's authentic to me. Some commissions I do, and I'll do them and I don't share them. But when it's something that's authentic and you're sharing your story, people want to hear that because I'm sure somebody else is probably out there like, oh yeah, my dad had a card like that too, and
Yeah.
sing with that story.
Yeah, well, and people want to get to know you as a person too. I mean, I think that's we're living in a time especially where, people want to know the founders of big brands. So of course they
Mhm.
want to know the painter behind the artwork. So it's like, why not lean into that more, you know?
Yeah, that's actually funny that you say that. So the company that I work for full time, I work directly with the founder and the CEO, and I ghostwrite his content for him. And so I'm always just sharing his stories from behind a screen here. But you're completely right. That's a bigger tech company, and I've worked with a lot of tech companies, and I've worked in the startup space in Charleston, and it is something that people really gravitate towards because they want to hear your success, but they also want to hear your struggles, and that's not just for big CEOs of big corporations. It goes for small business owners too, and even the small part-time artists that you're following on TikTok and Instagram. You want to see what's working for them. You want to see what's not working for them because it's either interesting to you or because you can somehow learn from it yourself.
Well, one thing you keep bringing up is TikTok. So I'm going to clock that and say, all right, can you share how you're using? I mean, we can go into all the different platforms, but
Sure.
TikTok, let's start with TikTok just because I think a lot of artists that I know are either like thinking about it, just started, or aren't even on the platform. So how are you using that? And then let's get into email and Instagram as well.
So TikTok, I personally like hate TikTok. Yeah, it's not my favorite place to create, and it doesn't feel authentic to me. But TikTok is my favorite place to go when I need to learn how to do something. So I no longer go to YouTube. I don't really go to Google. It's like ChatGPT and TikTok. Last night I was trying to like sketch out ideas to get a tattoo for in memory of my dad of his car. So
Mhm.
I went to TikTok and I was like, fine line classic car tattoos. I first of all couldn't really find any. So I'm like, okay, there's not a ton of these. But then I go down these rabbit holes and I'm like, okay, here's, this girl has hers on her forearm. This girl has hers here. And it's really pulling inspiration. So I love to go to TikTok to find things like that. Or even if it's a home improvement project, I'm usually on
Yeah.
TikTok. So for myself, I just don't love creating on TikTok. But I will just put stuff up there completely unedited. Maybe something, here's how I think of TikTok. I share on TikTok the way that I would share on an Instagram story.
Hmm.
So if I'm sharing a behind the scenes something or other on my Instagram story, I usually just put it up on TikTok and sometimes they blow up. Sometimes I get like 16 views and I'm like, okay, what's broken here? I spend a lot more time on Instagram. I spend a lot more time editing those reels and curating the content there, but it's still fun to experiment. I also like tried Blue Sky for a second and got off that, but
Yeah, I haven't even like, I'm like, a venture for another day. But I do think
yeah.
the TikTok thing you pointed out is interesting. I've had a couple things blow up, so I like weirdly have a higher following there than Instagram, but it's a totally different platform and I think about it differently. But I love that you say you kind of are using it as an education platform because a lot of people I know do that as well. Like I know my friend, she's about to get married, but she kind of like planned her wedding. Like she would literally get on TikTok and be like, "Hey, how do you guys like do this?" Or like, "Can you send me this?" And she would also look at up stuff. And I was like, wow, that more wedding planners should be on TikTok because this is so interesting. For artists, it's like if you know people are using it as a search platform in that way, like how can you lean into that?
I also think people are more conversational on TikTok. So I was painting oyster shells and I never really tried to paint like a seascape on an oyster shell before. So I, again, just shared it haphazardly and some people loved them. Some people had questions like, are you painting the back of it? What are you doing with the shell part? I had one person comment and say that painting them kind of takes away from their natural beauty. And I was like, yes, I completely agree. But this is like from a restaurant and they're going in the garbage. So it's either that or I paint them. On Instagram, if I share something like that, it's a lot of positive, love it, so cool. A lot of people on Instagram, in my experience, don't have that same vulnerability and sometimes critical feedback, but
Yeah,
it's just different. I don't know. It's like they're going to hype you up on Instagram, but TikTok, it's just more real. Everybody's
it
more
really
vulnerable.
is. You have to be prepared for that too.
Yes. So I
Yeah.
spend a lot more time on Instagram, but I try to throw things up on TikTok just for the sake of having a presence there because you never know. And then
Yeah.
sometimes it's a good way to just experiment. And I put no effort into it. I mean, I'm not editing my videos very much. I pick whatever song it recommends. Sometimes I'll do captions if it's applicable, but I try really hard not to spend as much time as I do putting together an Instagram reel.
How are you thinking about Instagram versus email? If those are your other two primary platforms, if I'm forgetting one, just add that in.
Yeah, no, I have a Facebook too. I've had that Facebook for so long. And I actually used to have a different Instagram, and then I wanted to change my business name, which that's like another story I can get into as my business name story. But I had a different Instagram. So I kind of started over from Instagram, but my Facebook had so many followers. Like I still get a lot of engagement on my Facebook. But as a marketer, I will always say, and I'm sure other marketers would agree, get people off your platform and onto your email list. No matter what platform you're using, you should always get people onto your email list because you don't own Instagram, you don't own TikTok. We've seen them go down. You own your email list, you own your website. So I could be better at it, but I'm always trying to do things to get people onto my email list. Once they're there, I feel like people are engaging. I don't see a lot of unsubscribes, which is really helpful because people are already there. They want to see your content. I'm not doing clickbaity things to get people onto my email list. I try
Yeah.
really hard to tell them exactly what they're going to get once they get my emails. And then once they're on my email list, I don't send many emails, maybe one or two a month. I teach classes locally, so I always promote my classes, new works, things that are upcoming. If I'm at a show, I share things like that. I don't, sometimes I'm on Substack and that's more for fun. So sometimes I'll share a Substack in there. But once they're off my Instagram and they're into my email, I'm very intentional about sharing exactly what they're going to get. So in my subject line, I will say upcoming class, new art, and more. Like I'm not trying to be too cheeky. I'm not trying to trick them into opening the email. And I
Mhm.
think that is what's helped with such a low unsubscribe rate.
Thinking about all of this, everything we've talked about today, if you were going back and starting over, is there anything you would kind of tell your younger self, anything you would do differently when you think about kind of starting and running this business?
Yes, I would have started running it as a business ahead of time because, again, it's so important. That imposter syndrome is real. I felt like people didn't want to see my art on my regular personal Instagram. I was
Yeah.
like, people don't want to see this. I'm going to start another one. I was embarrassed. I don't know why. That's how I felt. So I started a different Instagram, and that's where it was really just a hobby until until more opportunities started coming up. And then I was like, okay, we're gonna treat this as a business. Um, a quick side story though, I I had this like dream. I was going to open a co-working space in my town because there's no co-working spaces around here. And
Mhm.
that's where the name Second Shore came from. So I had this whole plan. And that's really when I was like, okay, we're going to make this a business and it's going to be centered around this brick and mortar location that will probably have a gallery. Maybe we'll do events. And that's kind of where it started. And then I pivoted away from that idea. It was actually like I found the perfect space. And then the same week, my husband lost his job and my dad passed away. And I was like, that's the universe telling me this is not what I
Yeah.
should be doing. I really took that as a sign, but that's when I was like, okay, we're still this concept. I loved my concept. I
Mhm.
loved the branding. And that's when I shifted my art business over under the Second Shore name. So if I could start over, I would have done that from the beginning and not just shared on Instagram as a hobby. I would have immediately filed an LLC, gotten EIN. Once opportunities start coming along, you're going to need those things and you're going to need to pay your taxes. A lot of art shows require you to have an EIN. They require you to have insurance. I get insurance like based on the event and I pay for it for the length of the event just
Yeah.
because I don't do many. So that's more financially
Mhm.
responsible for my situation. But I've been in situations where I wanted to apply for something and couldn't because I didn't have my shit together. And it's
Yeah.
hard. It's not easy to figure out. Like you have to do a lot of research to figure out how to do these things, especially like my LLC is in South Carolina, but then my business is in New York. It doesn't really matter, honestly, but I was like, what does this mean? And I thought
Yes.
it was confusing. And maybe there's a business coach out there that teaches these things. I don't know if you help people with this, but I
Really.
had to learn it all. So that would be my number one piece of advice. Even if you don't think it's going to be like a huge business, it's like $200 for your LLC and then you get your EIN. That can just open so many opportunities because if you get an opportunity for a show and somebody does a call for art and they need that and you didn't apply for it, then you can't apply. Like it's,
Yeah.
and then once you start doing that and you shift that mindset and you're like, okay, yeah, maybe it's a hobby, but it's a hobby that's going to make me money. It's a hobby that's still a business. I feel like the universe just brings the opportunities. And I don't know if it's part of manifesting it or what, but it just makes it easier for monetary opportunities to kind of fall into your lap.
When you start taking it seriously, that mindset shift happens and you're like, okay, this is more than a hobby. This is a business. Therefore, you taking it more seriously is going
Yep.
to lead to other people taking you more seriously, which leads to opportunity. I mean, it all I think snowballs, but it's like you believing in yourself, others are going to believe in you. It's like cheesy as
Yeah.
that sounds. It's true.
No, it's completely true. And I think this is where I struggled for a long time because I find these artists or, I listen to artists on other podcasts or follow them on social media. And it's like, okay, well, they're making six figures as an artist. Of course, they have this huge business or they
Yeah.
have these licensing deals. But even if you're making $500, you should still have it in a separate bank account so you can see your profit and loss statement and knowing exactly like what you're spending on your hobby versus what your business is making. And even if you're breaking even to pay for your hobby, who cares? You still know exactly what you're doing. And it just really makes things so much easier in the long run.
It really does. I also think you can't grow to that point of being like a real artist or like the six-figure artist or whatever you think you need to get to warrant an LLC or whatever. You can't get to that point if you aren't tracking your numbers. And so I always tell people, I'm like, even if this is like a full-blown hobby and you are going to break even, like get a separate bank account because
Yep.
you really don't know what you're making until you have a bank account where you see it going up and down. I feel lucky that I did super early just because I was working all these other jobs and I was like, no, I need to know like what is this company that I'm working so hard to build? What is it making? Like, is this viable? And once I realized that, it's also so clear. Well, like, oh, this is way more expensive than I thought. Oh, this is bringing in way more money than I thought. It's like, let's double down on what's working and let's subtract what's not. And you can't do that, at least not easily at all, if you don't set yourself up as a business.
Absolutely. And even if you want something as simple as a website, I use Squarespace. I don't know how much it is, to be honest, but let's just say
Yeah.
$300 a year for a basic plan without e-commerce. That's $300 a year. So if you have a separate bank account and you're like, okay, I sold a painting for 200 and I sold a few prints and that covers my website. And without having that all in separate bank accounts, you have no idea. And I used to be there. I'd be like, oh, I'll just pay for this. Like it's just a hobby. And it also kind of gives you the motivation. And this is where that like treating it as a business comes in. If and I've said this before, all the subscriptions and stuff hit for
Yeah.
whatever season you started your business. That's when they all come. And that's when the bank account starts taking that hit and you're like, oh shoot, I gotta get some things in motion here. And once you do that, though, that's where that like business shift mindset and that imposter syndrome kind of goes away. And you're like, okay, no, this is a business and I'm making this money and I'm paying for these things. And now that you have that, you're like, okay, well, what can I do next? Because now when I sell this next painting, maybe this painting sells for $200 and there's an extra $200. And you just kind of like glow in this confidence. And I mean, that's the only way to grow. And then once you're doing that consistently, before you know it, you've got a ton of money in the bank, and that website fee is just,
Something you
it's
don't
not,
even have to worry about.
yeah, it's not even a big deal. Now you're like, okay, this is running as a business.
Yeah. Well, and you have that confidence because everything that you're putting in, you are getting out what you put in. And I think you see that more clearly again when you have a separate bank account. You're like, oh, this is, I know I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's high. Or like, oh my gosh, it's low. Like, we got to figure it out versus when it's getting dumped into your general checking with everything else, you don't really get that feeling of like, even on the good side, like of, oh, wow, I'm really doing this.
I love what you just said about what you put out, like you put in, or however you just phrased that, because truly, even not just physically and like in the literal sense of your bank account and what's coming in and out, but
Yeah,
when you put that effort into your business, even if it's part-time, to say this is a business and I'm going to treat it this way and I'm going to respect it, it's going to give opportunities back to you. And you never know where that's going to land. And again, maybe you want to be part-time forever. Maybe you want to go full-time eventually. That's definitely never going to happen though if you don't set those things up way in
exactly.
advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share a tip, a lesson, an overarching something that you could pass on to other artists?
Yeah, I really think it's so important that even if you're early in your journey, if you're late in your journey, you have to find where your audience is. And we've talked about a lot of things and a lot of different marketing aspects, but finding your audience, they're not going to be everywhere. So you don't need to be on TikTok, Instagram, you need email, but TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, you don't have to be on all those platforms. You don't have to be at every art show. You don't have to be in every gallery. You just really have to find where your audience is. So for anybody, whether full-time or part-time, I think my biggest piece of advice is to try to figure that out. And it might take some trial and error, but once you figure that out, you're going to be able to leverage things and maximize your time, because then instead of being in five places, physically and digitally, that don't make sense and wasting all this time trying to sell one painting, if you're in two places, maybe you sell five paintings, if it's just the right place. So I think that's really important for people to try to know where their audience is and focus on those areas.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Well, speaking of that, can you share where our audience can learn more about you? So, website, socials, all that stuff.
Yeah, so my Instagram again is my primary. So it's at Second Shore, second spelled out like SECOND, Second Shore. And then my website is secondshore.co. So secondshore.co. I'm also on TikTok. I think that one is Second Shore Art because somebody already had the handle. I have an email newsletter, so I don't send out a ton of emails, but I share my art there. And those are my primary channels.
Amazing. Well, I will link all of this, but thank you so much for your time today. This was so fun.
Thank you. This was great. And it was so nice to talk to you and kind of dive into this conversation. So thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course, I could talk to you about marketing all day.